Hello, everybody. If you're here for mindset and inner work for freelance writing, you're in the right place. This is a free webinar put on by the B2BWI Writing Institute, where I help you become a happy and paid writer. In particular, I help mid-career professionals set up shop as a freelancer without having to start over at zero with your income. I'm Sarah. I'll be hosting today. So we're going to explore mindset and inner work, which the longer I've been in this space, which is going on 10 years, past 10 years, it really becomes clear that what's going on in your head is more than half of whatever is happening on the outside. And especially as you progress, as you have higher stakes clients, higher stakes projects, bigger salaries, the mindset stuff, the burden just gets heavier and heavier. So the people who talk to me about mindset have changed my life. Linda and Perry and Gandia, probably a couple other people I'm forgetting. And I'd love to just pass that on to everybody and share. And so today we have some crazy smart people who have been in the freelance space, have been in the in-house space, and just have a lot of good stuff to share for our perspective and our mindset. And it is my delight to introduce you to coach and copywriter Rachael Gaibel. Hello, Rachel.
Hi. Thanks you so much for having me today. So I do have a presentation for today, but don't worry, most of it is not a ton of words. There's lots of pictures, but I realized some of the content I have will lend itself better to explaining with pictures. I also had some reflection points. So if you do have a journal accessible or want to go grab one now, that could be useful for the second half of this. And you're also welcome to just reflect and think without writing it down. I want to focus today on addressing inner blocks to uncover possibility for what's next. And a lot of what I'm sharing is based off of concepts from positive psychology, as well as the Playing Big program through Tara Moore, which I'm certified in the facilitator program, just so you know where it's coming from. And why I feel like this topic is really important is often the inner blocks, because they're blocks, they're blocking us from really our full potential and what could be possible next for us in our lives. And if we let them lead and take over, then we're not really open to living our best life, taking the best right next step for us as freelancers. And so addressing them is really the first step to opening to more possibility. The inner blocks I will review are fear, self-doubt / judgment, and stress and overwhelm. And I'm going to start by discussing them and then talk about how you can address them and move past them. I have this slide up as a way to show that when we're in our comfort zone, where we feel safe and in control, we often don't have a lot of fear or negative self-talk or critical things coming up in our lives. However, when we think about stepping out of it, or when we do step out of it, what happens is we get into the fear zone. And that's actually supposed to happen. We're supposed to get overloaded with fear or self-doubt or a really loud inner critic and chatter. But we often don't really think that we're supposed to do this. And that's actually a good sign. That means that we're trying to step into something bigger in our lives. And we can get really overwhelmed by what's happening and get stuck in that place. So the point is to really go past the fear zone and learn how to work with it so that we can get into the learning zone where we are better at dealing with challenges and problems. We can acquire new skills, even extend our comfort zone so that we're more comfortable with more things that are uncertain. And then ultimately the self-actualization, the growth zone of we can find our purpose, live our dreams, set new goals, realize aspirations. And so what's most important to take away with this is we don't get there without going through the fear zone. And I have a story from the pandemic, which really highlights this. And I want to share it because it also has an unexpected ending that would make it so I actually would not be here right now if this did not happen. When the pandemic hit, I had just started doing consulting and I used to work in corporate HR. and started doing consulting based on what I had done there. I had taken a career break after having a child and was just ramping up consulting in January 2020, was about to be too busy. And then the pandemic hit, and 90% of my work fell apart in a week. It either got put on hold or canceled. And I completely panicked, as many of us did in this time. It was a very scary time. And what I did when I panicked was contact everybody I knew, trying to offer services, but I did it out of panic. And most people were probably also in a challenging situation and did not respond to my panicked emails. Then one person responded, and it was the one consultant that I was partnering with and supporting. And he said, "Hey, let's check in and see if there's anything that I can do to support you right now." What happened next was, once I had done everything I could do in the panic mode, I paused. I took a step back and really said, okay, I need to check in with what I really want right now. What is most important to me? How can I make the most of this? But how can I make the most of this and really do what I want to do next, and not just what I did in my corporate career? And two things happened at the same time. I looked on my office desk, and what was sitting on my office desk, many of this book, The Freelance Content Marketing Writer by Jennifer Goforth Gregory. And at the same time, someone that I had purchased a self-directed writing program from that I never had done emailed her audience and said, "Let me know how I can support you." And I really knew deep down that what I really wanted in my life was to bring writing more into it, both for work as well as personally, and restart my creative writing. And it was actually during the pandemic that I took the next steps to start doing content marketing and do content writing, and started adding that as a service. And then I also restarted my creative writing journey, which brings me a lot of joy in my life. And the one consultant that I was still working with was kind enough for me to have a trial period with him to try out, do some blogs. But I will say the first blog I wrote for him was horrible. But I kept going and got a lot better. And it was horrible because I never ghostwritten a blog before for somebody. So I needed to take that first step and learn. So I share that story, and again, wouldn't be here without that, because often when there are things that happen out of our control that are challenging, it's easy to get into a fear place or an overwhelmed place. But those aren't the places where we really uncover what we want to do and what ultimately matters most to us next. And that is what I want to help all of you do. So I'm going to talk about each of the areas of inner blocks first. And why I have this picture of a tiger with fear is because our mind cannot distinguish between a fear of a tiger chasing us versus an emotional fear or emotional hurt. So if our brains can't distinguish, like, our brains look at fear as we are going to be eaten by a tiger. So it often has a very strong visceral reaction and can really knock us over if it's strong enough. So again, with fear, I do bring that up because the best way to work with it is really to pause and not let it overtake us. And what I'll share with what fear looks like is, the reason it shows up often is to help us recognize and react to any possible future dangers or hurt, whether they are physical or emotional. It was like, it's part of an old aspect of our brain, like the oldest aspect of our brain, the limbic system, the amygdala. And so it was really there to help us from physical dangers. It's not as good with emotional dangers. And the way we react is the fight, flight, or freeze, which many of you are familiar with. We're trying to escape or avoid or fight the situation. We have emotional fears often based on our own painful experiences or watching others go through fear-inducing experiences. We also then tend to generalize fear. So then if something is scary in one maybe type of situation, then we can generalize it to something broader. Like my pandemic example, every year in the winter or at least for the 2 years after, it didn't happen this year. I would panic again around the same time. So it's this like seasonal, like it became this like cyclical thing of, oh no, everything's going to fall apart if I didn't hear back from one potential client because we generalize things. And we're also not too good at figuring out what to fear. Sometimes we fear the wrong things. So I share this as a way to show that this is what we're up against with fear, and we can work with it, but it can be very strong and very overpowering. And what we want to learn to do is not to let the inner blocks control us and take over, and let them be there, but not be as loud. So self-doubt. Self-doubt is going to show up a lot when we're trying to step out of our comfort zone. It comes related to our inner critic, which all of us have, which is an inner voice that is really part of our safety instinct. So it's trying to keep us safe. So as I showed in that picture of stepping out of our comfort zone, we don't feel safe when we're trying to step out of our comfort zone. And self-doubt is a way to help, like the safety instinct, hold us back and try to keep us safe. The safety instinct doesn't care about us having a fulfilling life or our growth and potential. So again, it's something to learn how to work with so that we are able to move past it and not let it control us. And what self-doubt looks like, again, as your safety instinct, it's a critical, limiting, or negative self-talk. Sometimes it's very devious. If your inner critic or that voice of self-doubt, if it just said, I don't think you should do this, it's not safe to try something new, you wouldn't listen. So instead, it has to come up with ways to get at you where you will actually listen. And that's where it can sometimes be like limiting beliefs, say things that are limiting to you around, oh, you're not good at anything else. This is what you're good at. So stay with what you're good at. You can't do that new thing. You're not ready. It'll say things like that that are more limiting versus sometimes it is critical. Sometimes it says mean, harsh things, but it depends. Everyone's inner critic is different. And once you figure out one way to work with it, sometimes it shows up in other ways. But it also is presumably the voice of reason where it's trying to say in a reasonable way that you shouldn't do X, Y, Z. Could be irrational, but persistent, either or thinking, a broken record, where a broken record is saying the same thing, either or where it's very black and white. This will not work instead of how might this be possible? And so again, this is another thing to notice that this goes on within us, especially as we're trying to go outside of our comfort zone. And it could get incredibly loud when we're trying to step out of our comfort zone. So one way to know if it is your inner critic versus realistic thinking is look at what's going on and what it's saying. So the inner critic is going to be very definite. This won't work. You can't do freelancing, whatever it may be, or you can't leave your day job versus curious questions of, like I said, like, how might this be possible? How could I make this work? What would I need to focus on? The either or thinking versus able to see nuance. If it's something where you can see the gray more, then it's more realistic thinking versus either or is this or that is going to work. The yes, no questions where anything is a response would be a yes or a no, where you say, it will ask you or you ask yourself, can I do this? No. Versus how could I do this is more open-ended, repetitive. Sometimes it's this same thing that goes on and on in your head over and over versus forward moving. How could I take the next step? Focuses on problems and lacking areas. That's where it focuses on what's not going to work, what hasn't worked, what is wrong versus looking for solutions. How could I make this work? I know this didn't work before. What do I need to do differently? Speaks in an anxious tone because it's scared. Think of a scared child, or speaking in a calmer tone. So that's how you can distinguish in your head what voice you might be hearing. And then moving on to stress and overwhelm. So with stress and overwhelm, what I would say overall is that like we all are dealing with stress in our lives. And when it gets to the point where we're in more constant stress or more constant overwhelm, it's not a good place to take action and not a good place to really be able to uncover what might be next from a place of more possibility or openness, because we're so focused on getting through the next thing. And it's a place where we actually need to pause if we're in a continuous cycle of stress and overwhelm and not do anything. And so for this one, just to distinguish between the two of them, what stress is, if we're evaluating an environmental demand as beyond our ability to cope successfully. And it includes elements of unpredictability, uncontrollability, feeling overloaded. All of these can happen a lot as an entrepreneur, freelancer. So if we're not used to working with ourselves on unpredictability, oh, I thought I had something planned next month and that client just canceled, then it's easy to fall into stress. The overwhelm is, I'd say, blown up stress, and where we often shut down because it's too much. So completely overcome or overpowered by a thought or feeling, and something is unfolding faster than my nervous system and psyche can manage. And again, these are places where if you find that there's a lot of stress or overwhelm in your life, to stop taking action and really pause. And if you are in a place where you're feeling constantly overwhelmed, and I'll share what's next, but could be a place where focusing on doing your own self-care and your own well-being could be most important to get yourself out of the cycle of overwhelm so that you can be in a better place to uncover what might be next for you. So now I'm going to move into this possibility. I didn't like the definitions I had found for it. So a while ago, I created my own definition for possibility. And what I think possibility is opening to the likelihood that something that doesn't yet exist, a state, a way of being, or reality coming to be. And what I'd add around this idea of possibility is that this is you trying to go towards some kind of maybe a vision or something that you want in your life, something you care about, and trying to make that more of a reality. That there's this potential for something like seeds of something new to come forth in your life. But again, if you're in the fear zone, you're not going to be able to open to that in your life because you're going to get really stuck in fear and self-doubt, and the overwhelm could take over as well. So one thing I want to share as an overview with possibility is around visions before I jump into how to work with possibility. And this is what people think visions look like. Some visions might look like this. They think it's this clear path with this view of, okay, I need to follow this exact path that's already laid out with a beautiful view to get to my point. That beautiful view is your, ultimate vision. And there's varying levels of what vision looks like. Sometimes you can see that view of the mountains to begin with. If you can, likely there's no path though. You're creating your path with everything that you're doing. And so I want to show this to say, this is not what visions look like. And if you don't have a vision that looks like this, that's normal. It's supposed to look different than this. Like I said, you may see the mountains, but if you do, there's no path. And a lot of people don't see much of anything. What many visions look like is trying to look through binoculars to see this mountain view, and you can't see very far ahead of you. That you know that there is this mountain on the other side, but what is fog? And maybe you see a few steps in front of you for the trees. So I'd put this in perspective to say, yes, have a vision that you're going towards, but you might not be able to see how to get there. And the way that you start getting there is really trying to go in the direction of your vision and trying to go in the direction of what matters to you. But you might not, like I said, you might not see it, even if you believe it's there, because it is there if there's no fog. So now to the different tips and suggestions for possibility. And I'm going to pause for a minute on each of these pages. What I'd recommend, because there's a few journal prompts on each page, is to take one, because we'll only have probably a minute for each one. So take one and journal on it for a minute or two. And then if it resonates, come back later. You could take screenshots or a picture, whatever it may be, or write down the question and come back later. The 4 areas I want to share for how to uncover possibility are becoming aware, pausing and reflecting, caring for your well-being, and leading with courage. So the become aware, the most important thing you can do when you're in the fear zone is to notice that's what's happening. Once you notice, it doesn't have as much control over you. And you identifying it as a separate voice, saying, oh, there's fear again, or oh, there's my inner critic, whatever you want to call it. There's my self-doubt. That's not you. So the next one, recognize is not from your wisest and best self. So recognizing that it's separate from what the wisest and best part of you would say is going to make a huge impact, because then when it shows up, it doesn't have to control you, because you know that it's this safety instinct. It's something that's trying to keep you safe. And you don't have to believe what it says. It doesn't need to be in charge. So this one has one question around, you can ask your fear or self-doubt, what are you trying to protect me from? So I'll leave a minute here just for you to reflect before we move on to the next one. The pause and reflect. As I mentioned in the beginning and with my pandemic story, it's not a good place to take action when you're in the fear zone. You want to get yourself out of that before you take action. What I have found is that people often take more action from a fear or self-doubt place than they otherwise do once they pause and check in and get to a place where those are not controlling them. So that also helps with the overwhelm, because sometimes people get overwhelmed because they're trying to take all this action that's not working. And I actually recommend people take less action that's more aligned with what matters to you. So the pause and reflect, the values. This is about your values. So what matters to me is about you reflecting on what are you valuing about your life, like what matters to you, what's important to you, and takes time to reflect on that. Now, that's a big question. You can Google how to come up with your values, but just thinking about like right now in your life, what matters to me? What do I care about? Curiosity. Curiosity is, I'd say, a very important way to go forward when there are unknowns. Thinking about what you can be genuinely curious about, really sitting with trying to connect to being curious and wondering, how could this work out? How could this unfold? What might be next for me? And really sitting with the possibility that there's something out there besides that fear and self-doubt, and more of an openness. And then connect to your best or wise self. So this is around connecting to the best parts of you and getting out of letting fear and self-doubt be those things that are leading you. So thinking of what would my best or wise self say here? So again, I'll give a minute for reflection before we move to the next one. The next is around caring for your well-being. The more you're trying to step out of your comfort zone, the more it brings up, as I mentioned, like this fear zone, and that takes a lot of energy. So the more you can look at having practices every day that really you're caring for yourself and have those things that really nourish you, the more you'll be able to have energy to both work with the fear zone as well as to break out of it and get into the learning zone. So if you think about the first step, I'd say with well-being is around connecting to what nourishes you or energizes you. So looking at things in your life that really either make you feel alive, energize you, nourish you, things really essential for your life to have the best life that you can. Then also assessing, okay, what are my go-to junk foods are? It could be literal junk food, or it could be those things in your life that feel like junk food that you grab to, but maybe are not very nourishing. Often it can be things like social media or other technology related things, but other people have other kinds of junk food. And this is to assess not that all junk food's bad. It's just bad when That's all you do. So looking at, okay, what are my junk foods in my life? And are there things that I could cut down a little bit in my junk foods? And then what am I starving for? This one is around what comes up for you that you really do want in your life that you don't have as much. For my pandemic story, it was writing. And I just really felt that once I connected to what I wanted to do next. And then what's one thing you want to do more of to take care of yourself? Just start with looking at one thing, whether it's cutting down a little bit of something that feels like junk food and what you can replace it with that's more nourishing. That will make a big difference. So I'll leave a minute before we move on to the next last one. So courage is the next one that, as I mentioned in the beginning, you don't get out of the fear zone by ignoring it or pretending that it's not there. You get out of it by going through it. And I love this quote from Susan David, who's an organizational psychologist. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is fear walking. Walk directly into your fears with your values as your guide towards what matters to you. So that question around what matters to you is how you can start leading with something different than your fear or your self-doubt. And this starts with changing your mindset to lead with what is important to you. So looking at what matters to you, what's important to you, and have that lead. Bring the fear and self-doubt along, but remind them they're not in charge. They get to be smaller, but what's important to you, your best self, your wisest self, that should be in charge, not your fear and your self-doubt. The next one around courage is taking steps that resonate with you. I do believe that not all action is created equal, and taking action that where you feel a yes to, where it resonates in some way, is the most important action you can take. So looking at how you can take that step. If it's a potential client, reaching out to them, look at their and what they have out there. And if it resonates with you and you're saying, yes, I would want to work with this person, that's who you should reach out to. Or if you're having an initial call and it really sounds right, feels right, that's who you should work with. The people that are giving you a lot of red flags are not the ones that you should be taking your attention to. Sometimes you need to do that as stopgaps as long as it's not so bad, but they shouldn't be your focus. And then also taking imperfect action, and I'll show more on the last slide, which is the next slide, but that you really do need to take action without being already excellent at something. And that's how you become better, is to keep taking imperfect action and get better and practice. So I'll leave this for 30 seconds or so and then show the last side of how you can get started. So on this start now, to get out of the fear zone, you really can start now. Again, hopefully once you've reflected and noticed and taken care of your well-being, then you can start with that courage. This is from Adam Grant, who's also an organizational psychologist, from his new book, Hidden Potential. And I love this graphic that if you start today, you're going to make so much more progress than if you start when you think you're ready. And the quote, you can't become truly comfortable with a skill until you've practiced it enough to master it. But practicing it before you master it is uncomfortable, so you often avoid it. Accelerating learning requires a second form of courage, being brave enough to use your knowledge as you acquire it. And that is what I want to leave you with, to really take that courage and be brave and do those things that you most want for your life and career, and take those steps, even if you're not yet, you haven't yet mastered it. So thank you for having me on this. And Sarah, I have not been monitoring the comments, but if there's questions, I'm happy to take questions.
I have.
Perfect.
So if anybody has questions, feel free to keep throwing them in there. I have a couple of my own as well. So the first one I want to grab from Linda, as far as time frames, how long does it take someone to begin to overcome this or maybe change that panic response? Days, weeks, years, which I know is going to be a answer.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't have an exact time frame to say for you because it's very dependent on what is coming up for people and maybe how much it's rocking your world. So one thing I can say is by noticing it and becoming aware and working with it, often you can shift out of it within days or weeks. And then you learn how to work with it. And so when fear comes back up, you can, or self-doubt, you can work with it. What also happens, and this is, thank you for asking this question, because what also happens is that sometimes self-doubt and fear are really loud at the beginning. And once you tell them you're serious, that you're doing this and going forward, they sometimes quiet down a little bit on their own and aren't as overwhelming and overpowering after a few weeks. This helps, I'd say, both accelerate it as well as make sure that you're taking the right action that's not aligned with what fear and self-doubt want you to do.
Yeah. I'd add to that also that, at least for me, I found I have cycles of momentum where sometimes something pops up and I'm like, whoosh, like the car didn't even stop to pick up that fear. And then other times it seems like there's a little jello that I'm stuck in and it does take a little time. So I think it depends on you. It depends on the situation and how traumatic it is. And it depends on like how observant you're being and how much you notice stuff. I wish there was a better way to give you a time frame question, Linda, but once again, it depends.
Yeah, but it's something that you're always going to have to work with. People may not want to hear that,
Oh, there you go.
but anytime you're wanting to step out of your comfort zone in particular, it's always going to be there and be there. So as you get better working with it, you're also growing more. And then it comes up again for you to work with. If it's not there for a long period of time, then maybe you've gotten too comfortable.
Yeah, and I feel like I took this from some podcasts, so I don't get credit for this, but it's very much like the weight room at the gym. There's always going to be weights there for you to go and lift because that's the whole point is that you're lifting, but you get stronger. And so you can lift better weights, different weights, heavier weights over time.
Yeah, but I've seen sometimes on like freelance Facebook groups, people think it's a bad thing when their inner critic or imposter syndrome shows up, and that's actually a good thing. And it's going again that it keeps showing up. People think that there's something wrong with them if it keeps showing up, and it actually means that you're trying to push yourself more out of your comfort zone. And a lot of people don't do that in their lives. So the more you can learn to work with it, the better you'll just be able to be with expanding your comfort zone and being more in that learning zone and growth zone. But there's nothing wrong with it showing up.
Right.
It's supposed to.
Cool. Well, I've mentioned perhaps I could share the slides that you went through in
Yeah,
the
sure.
after event stuff. So I'll have that loaded with the replay and just thank you. I feel like this was a great overview of mindset and how anyone can start to dip into it.
Thanks. And if you want to connect with me, I think Sarah mentioned in the beginning, I do offer coaching, and you can connect with me on LinkedIn if you want, or I have a Substack newsletter. So feel free to find me and connect, and happy to be of service if I can.
That's a wrap on this portion of the webinar. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you have liked what you see here today, head to B2BWritinginstitute.com and subscribe for the Happy and Paid Freelance Writer newsletter, where I'll send you a note each week with something interesting to learn. Thanks for joining us.